Before you hear anything else, I want you to listen. Just for a moment. Can you hear that? It's the silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of an empty house on Christmas Day. The kind of quiet that feels like a judgment. No, this is a different kind. This is the quiet of contentment. It's the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall that my late husband Robert cherished so much. It's a peaceful quiet, the kind that settles over a home after it has been filled to the brim with laughter and love. This year, for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, my house was not silent on Christmas. It was loud, it was chaotic, it was messy, and it was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. And it's all thanks to my son. Not Walter, the son you might have assumed I was talking about. No, this was a gift from a son Walter never even knew existed. My son, my only son as far as the world was concerned, was Walter. He's a man who has built his life on a foundation of ambition and appearances. He looks the part of a successful son, with his sharp suits and his even sharper opinions. For years, his sharpest opinion was reserved for me. According to Walter, I was not family-oriented enough. It was his favorite criticism, a well-worn cudgel he'd bring out whenever he wanted to justify his own emotional distance, whenever he wanted to put a polite, respectable name on his neglect. If he missed my birthday, it was because I hadn't made a big enough deal about family gatherings in the past. If he didn't call for weeks, it was because I wasn't the sort of warm, bustling mother who created an irresistible gravitational pull. It was always my fault, you see. My failure to be the mother he'd seen on television was the reason he was so cold. It was a neat and tidy excuse, and he used it to build a wall between us, brick by loveless brick. The final brick was laid about a month before Christmas. The phone rang, and it was Walter. I could hear the echo on the line, the telltale sign that his wife, Meredith, was on speakerphone, a silent juror in the court of my maternal failings. My heart did its usual little dip. A call from Walter was rarely for a chat. It was usually a summons or a request. "Hi, Mom," he started, his voice having that smooth, professional gloss he uses when he's about to deliver news he knows I won't like. "Listen, about Christmas this year. Meredith and I have been talking." I waited. I knew this tone. This was the tone he used when he told me they were selling the small starter home I had helped them with the down payment on for a bigger, more impressive one in a gated community. This was the tone he used when he explained why they couldn't make it to his father's memorial anniversary. "We're going to be at Meredith's parents' house this year. The Harts are having their big annual party and, well, it's just not your scene." I gripped the phone a little tighter. "Not my scene? Walter, it's Christmas. I thought we were going to have dinner here like we always do." The always was a stretch. The last few years it had been a rushed affair, a few hours squeezed between his other more important obligations. Meredith's voice, thin and reedy, cut in. "It's just Jane, it's a very formal event. It's really more of a networking opportunity for Walter. A lot of his firm's senior partners will be there. It's very sterile." Sterile, that was the word she used. My own home, the one where I'd raised her husband, filled with the scent of pine and cinnamon, the warmth of a fireplace, was being compared unfavorably to a sterile networking event. Walter cleared his throat, jumping back in to deliver the killing blow. "Mom, you've just never been that well, you know. You've never been that family-oriented. You've always been more independent. We just figured you'd be fine on your own. You probably prefer the quiet, right?" There it was, the cudgel. He was using my supposed lack of family feeling to uninvite me from Christmas, to abandon me on the one day of the year that's all about family, and then frame it as a kindness, as if he were respecting my wishes. The audacity of it stole my breath. I had spent 35 years of my life dedicated to him, to our small family of 3. I had hosted every holiday, baked every birthday cake, attended every single school play and soccer game. I had poured my life into that boy, and he had the nerve to call me anything but family-oriented. The silence stretched. I could picture them in their pristine gray and white living room, Walter pacing in his expensive socks, Meredith perched on the edge of a couch that probably cost more than my car, both of them waiting for me to agree, to absolve them of their guilt. What was I supposed to say? That he was a cruel, selfish son? That he was breaking my heart? That would only lead to a fight. To him accusing me of being dramatic, of being, you guessed it, too emotional and not logical. So I gave them what they wanted. I see, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Well, you two have a wonderful time then. Great, we knew you'd understand, Mom. Walter said, the relief in his voice palpable. We'll call you on the day. Of course, talk soon. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. It was the loneliest sound in the world. He had done it. He had finally officially discarded me. He had packaged up his own neglect, wrapped it in the pretty paper of my supposed failings, and handed it back to me. And in that moment, in the crushing silence of my empty home, a grief I had buried for 40 years began to stir. He thought I wasn't family-oriented. He had no idea. He had no idea what I had given up for the very idea of family. The hours after that phone call bled into one another in a gray haze of disbelief, and a pain so profound it felt physical. I walked through the rooms of my house, the house Robert and I had bought when Walter was just a toddler. Every corner held a ghost. There was the scuff mark on the baseboard in the hallway, stubbornly resistant to every cleaning product, from the time a 5-year-old Walter had tried to ride his tricycle indoors. I ran my hand over the worn velvet of Robert's favorite armchair, the place he'd sat every evening reading the paper while I cooked dinner. In the living room on the mantelpiece was a gallery of our lives. Walter's school photos, a succession of toothy grins and bad haircuts. Walter graduating from college, his arms slung around me and Robert, his face beaming with pride. Walter on his wedding day, looking stiffly happy next to Meredith. It was the story of a family, the story I had dedicated my life to writing. And now, the main character had written me out of the latest chapter. I sank onto the sofa, the silence of the house pressing in on me. It was in these moments of profound loneliness that the other ghost, the oldest one, always chose to visit. The ghost of a life I'd never lived, of a choice I'd made when I was just a girl. Walter's words echoed in my head. Not family-oriented. The bitter irony of it was a poison seeping into my heart. He had a brother, an older brother he'd never known, a son I had held for only a few hours before I was forced to let him go. I was 17. It was a different time, a time when girls like me, from good families who made bad mistakes, became problems to be quietly solved. My parents, pillars of their small community, were horrified, not at the boy, who disappeared the moment he heard the news, but at me, at the shame I would bring upon them. There was no discussion of keeping my baby. The arrangements were made with a hushed efficiency that was terrifying. I was sent away to a home for unwed mothers, run by a stern-faced religious order, a place where girls like me were hidden away until the evidence of our sins could be passed on to more worthy, more complete families. I remember the day he was born with a clarity that has never faded. It was a cold spring morning. He was so small, so perfect. He had a full head of dark hair, just like mine. I held him to my chest, my tears falling onto his tiny wrinkled face. I whispered his name, Samuel, a name I'd chosen from a book, a name I wouldn't even be allowed to write on his birth certificate. The nurses took him from me after just a few hours. They told me it was for the best, that it would be easier if I didn't get attached. Easier for whom? I never saw him again. I was sent home, sworn to secrecy, expected to pick up my life as if nothing had happened, as if a piece of my heart hadn't just been carved out and given away to strangers. That secret became the bedrock of my life. I finished school, went to work at the local library, and tried to be the dutiful daughter my parents expected. A few years later, I met Robert. He was a kind, steady man, a civil engineer who saw in me a quietness he mistook for simple serenity. He was decent and good, and he offered me a chance at a normal life, a life where I could be a wife, a mother, in the proper way. I made a choice then, a choice that many would surely debate. I didn't tell him about Samuel. How could I? My past felt like a stain, a shameful story that would tarnish the bright, clean future he was offering me. I was terrified that if he knew, he would see me as my parents did, as damaged goods. So I buried Samuel deep inside, a secret sorrow that was mine alone. It wasn't about deceiving Robert. It was about protecting the new life I so desperately wanted, a life free from the judgment that had almost broken me. When Walter was born, I poured all of my thwarted maternal love into him. I was determined to be the perfect mother. I would give him the stable, secure family I had never been able to give my firstborn. Robert adored him, saw him as a reflection of his own success, and perhaps I overcompensated. I smoothed over every bump in his path, catered to his every whim, desperate to ensure he never felt anything but cherished. But something in Walter was different. He was never a content child. He always seemed to be looking over my shoulder for something better, something more. He valued things over people, achievements over affection. The older he got, the more he seemed to resent the very ordinariness of the loving home we provided. He wanted more. More prestige, more money, more status. He saw our quiet middle-class life, not as a gift but as a shabby starting point he had to overcome. And he started using his critique of me as a tool, a way to explain his own restless dissatisfaction. The phone rang, jarring me from my reverie. I looked at the caller ID. Clara, my best friend since high school, the one person who knew almost everything. I let it ring a few times before answering, my voice thick with unshed tears. Jane, are you okay? You sound awful. And just like that, the dam broke. I told her everything. The phone call, the networking event, the sterile in-laws, and finally the words that cut the deepest. He said I wasn't family-oriented, Clara. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then Clara's voice, sharp and fierce. That ungrateful little toad. Jane, he has been using that line on you since he was a teenager. It's his get-out-of-jail-free card for being a selfish, neglectful son. He defines family as what can you do for me right now, and if you're not serving his immediate needs, you're failing. It's nonsense. It's emotional blackmail, and you know it. Clara had her own struggles with her daughter, who was flighty and unreliable, so she understood the particular pain of a child's indifference. She was my rock, my voice of reason. What are you going to do? She asked gently. I don't know, I whispered, looking around the silent, memory-filled room. I think I'm just going to be alone for Christmas. Maybe it's what I deserve. Don't you dare talk like that, she snapped. You don't deserve this. He does. He deserves to be sitting in a sterile room making small talk with a bunch of stiffs while you're doing something wonderful. Her words hung in the air. Doing something wonderful. My eyes drifted to a small lacquered box on the bookshelf. Inside was the only thing I had from that time, a faded photograph of me at 16, a year before Samuel was born, my face full of a naive hope that life had long since extinguished. And a new thought, wild and terrifying and exhilarating, began to form in my mind. It rose up from that deep, hidden place where I had buried the grief for my lost son. Walter had rejected the family I had built for him. He had deemed it insufficient. He had taken my love and my sacrifice and thrown it back in my face. For so long, I had accepted my role as the not quite good enough mother, the quiet, independent woman who supposedly preferred to be alone. But it was a lie. It was a role he had assigned me. I stood up and walked over to the bookshelf, my movements suddenly decisive. I picked up the box. The pain from Walter's rejection was still raw, but now it was mingling with a much older, deeper ache. An ache for Samuel. For 40 years I had kept my promise to stay away, to not disrupt his life. I had told myself it was for his own good. But was it? Or was it for mine? Was I just afraid of what I might find? Afraid of being rejected all over again? Walter didn't want the family I'd given him. Fine. Maybe it was time to find the family I had lost. I looked at the picture of the young girl I used to be, a girl who had been given no choices. Now I was a woman of 65. I had choices. My life was my own. It wasn't about revenge on Walter, not really. Not yet. It was about filling a 40-year-old void in my own heart. It was about finding out what happened to my boy. My resolve hardened, turning from a fragile hope into something solid and unshakable. I was going to find Samuel. The decision to find Samuel was one thing. The reality of it was another entirely. My first few nights were a blur of late-night scrolling, typing phrases into a search engine that felt both hopeful and foolish. How to find a child given up for adoption in 1978. Sealed Adoption Records, Pennsylvania. Adoption Reunion Registry. The Internet, which could tell you the weather on Jupiter or the full filmography of a B-list actor, was maddeningly vague and discouraging on this topic. I was met with a wall of legal jargon, privacy laws, and websites for support groups filled with stories as heartbreaking as my own, many of which ended in dead ends and disappointment. The laws were designed to protect everyone's privacy, but it felt like they were designed to protect the secret, to keep the past buried forever. I realized I couldn't do this alone. My next call was to Clara, this time not for sympathy, but for strategy. I laid out my plan, my voice steadier than it had been in days. I'm going to find him, Clara. I have to. Clara listened patiently, her support unwavering but tinged with a healthy dose of caution. Oh, Jane, I think it's a wonderful idea. I really do. But you have to prepare yourself, she warned, her voice gentle. It's been 40 years. What if he doesn't want to be found? What if his adoptive parents never told him about you? What if he's had a difficult life and finding you would just open up old wounds? Her questions were like little stones dropped into the placid surface of my new resolve, sending ripples of doubt across it. She was right, of course. My fantasy was of a happy reunion, a tearful embrace, but the reality could be anything. It could be rejection, it could be anger, it could be nothing at all. I know, I said, my voice small. I know all that, but not knowing is worse. This hole in my life, it's always been there. Walter was supposed to fill it, but he just made it bigger. I have to try, Clara. For me. Then you try, she said, her voice firm again, and I'll be right here whatever happens. Her blessing gave me the courage to take the next step. I spent days researching, moving past the amateur forums and into the world of professional services. I learned about confidential intermediaries appointed by the courts, but that process could take years. Then I found what I was looking for, a highly rated, discreet firm specializing in genealogical research and adoption searches. They called themselves KinSearch. Their website was professional, filled with testimonials from people just like me, people who had found their birth parents, their siblings, their children. It wasn't cheap. The fee for a comprehensive search was substantial, enough to take a significant bite out of the savings I had carefully guarded since Robert passed away. It was a real, tangible investment in a deeply uncertain outcome. I scheduled a consultation. I spoke with a woman named Miss Albright, whose voice was a soothing blend of compassion and professionalism. She asked me questions I hadn't allowed myself to think about for decades: the name of the hospital, the city, the exact date, any non-identifying information I'd been given about the adoptive parents. I remembered being told only that they were a stable, loving couple from a nearby county who couldn't have children of their own. I told her everything I could remember, my voice cracking with the effort of pulling these memories from the vault where I had locked them away. I paid the fee, sent them a DNA sample as requested, and then the hardest part began, the waiting. Life fell into a strange rhythm. On the surface, nothing had changed. I did my grocery shopping, tended my garden, went to my book club. But underneath, a frantic, hopeful energy buzzed within me. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. Every email notification made my hands tremble. Miss Albright had been clear that the process could take months, but I couldn't help but hope for a miracle. It was during this period of anxious waiting that Walter called. I saw his name on the screen and my stomach twisted into a knot. It had been a few weeks since the Christmas phone call, and I hadn't heard a peep from him. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was clipped and devoid of any warmth. "Mom, it's Walter. I'm having my accountant overnight some documents to you regarding Dad's estate. There's a small educational trust he set up for me that I'm liquidating to put towards the new boat. It requires your signature as the original executor. Just sign where it's flagged and send it back in the prepaid envelope as soon as you can. Thanks." A boat. He was chasing me down not to apologize, not to check on me, but because he needed my signature to buy a boat. The casual entitlement of it was breathtaking. I knew about the trust. Robert had set up a modest one, hoping Walter would use it for a down payment on a house, or perhaps for his own children's future education. A boat. It felt like such a perfect symbol of Walter's priorities, a flashy, expensive toy for his own pleasure. The documents arrived the next day. As I sat at my dining room table looking at the legal papers, I noticed something. The trust was structured as a sub-account of Robert's main estate, of which I was the sole beneficiary. Walter clearly knew about the trust, but I wondered if he understood the full picture of the will. He had always operated with the supreme confidence of an only child who assumes everything will one day be his. He saw my assets as merely a holding account for his future inheritance. He had no idea how much power I actually held. And he certainly had no idea that he wasn't in fact an only child. I signed the papers. It wasn't worth the fight, but as I slid them into the prepaid envelope, I felt a subtle shift inside me. This was the last time. The last time I would just passively do what he asked. The last time I would enable his casual, thoughtless use of me. My search for Samuel was no longer just about healing an old wound. It was now also about building a new life, a life where my worth wasn't determined by my utility to Walter. 2 more weeks went by. I was beginning to lose hope, to fall into the spiral of doubt that Clara had warned me about. Maybe this was a fool's errand. Maybe I had spent a small fortune just to have my heart broken all over again. I was sitting in the kitchen nursing a cup of tea and staring out at the gray November sky when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Jane, a familiar professional voice said. It's Eleanor Albright from Kinsearch. My breath caught in my chest. Yes, I have some news, she said, and I could hear a smile in her voice. We have a positive identification. The DNA was a definitive match with a man in the state reunion registry. His name is Samuel Miller. He was adopted by a couple named David and Mary Miller, who lived in Chester County. Jane. We found him. The world tilted on its axis. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I couldn't speak. Miss Albright continued gently. There's more. His adoptive parents, who have since passed away, were very open with him. He's known he was adopted his whole life. And Jane, he's registered as being open to contact from his birth mother. He's been waiting too. He's been waiting. Those 3 words shattered the last of my composure. All these years I had thought of him as a ghost, a memory, but he was real. A real man, living a real life, and somewhere in his heart he had been waiting for me. After 40 years of silence, the conversation was finally about to begin. The discovery that Samuel was not only alive and well but actively open to contact sent a jolt of pure, terrifying joy through me. The first step, according to the wise and steady Miss Albright, was not a phone call. An unexpected call could be overwhelming, putting him on the spot. She strongly advised I write a letter. It would give him the space to process the information, to feel his own feelings without having to manage mine at the same time. For the next 2 days, my dining room table was my sanctuary and my torture chamber. It was covered in crumpled balls of paper, failed attempts to distill 40 years of silence into a few coherent paragraphs. How do you begin a letter to a son you've never known? Dear Samuel felt too formal, too distant. My dearest son felt too presumptuous, a claim I hadn't earned the right to make. I must have written and rewritten that first line 100 times. Finally, with Clara's encouragement over the phone, I settled on the simple, honest truth to Samuel. I wrote about the girl I was, not to make excuses but to offer context. I told him about the fear, the shame, and the impossible pressure from my family. I told him that giving him up was not a rejection of him, but a desperate, flawed act of a child trying to protect her child in the only way she knew how. I told him I had named him Samuel in my heart. I told him I had never, not for one single day, forgotten him. I wrote about my husband Robert, a good man who had given me a second chance at life, and about his son Walter. I was honest about my fears, my hope that he had a happy life, and my deep, abiding regret. I didn't ask for anything. I just laid my heart out on the page, ending with the simple, trembling words. If you are open to it, I would love to hear from you. Whatever you decide, I hope life has been kind to you. With my deepest hope, Jane. I sent the letter via a trackable service, and the days that followed were the longest of my life. I watched the tracking number online like a hawk. Delivered. Read. Then, nothing. A week passed. The silence was deafening. All of Clara's warnings came rushing back. I had been a fool. I had opened the door to my past only to have it slammed shut in my face. I pictured him reading my letter with anger, or worse, with indifference, and tossing it in the trash. Then, one evening, as I was mindlessly scrolling through news articles on my tablet, an email notification popped up. The subject line made my heart stop. From Samuel Miller. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tap the screen to open it. The email was short, but every word was a balm on my 40-year-old wound. Dear Jane, it began. Thank you for your letter, and thank you for your courage in writing it. To be honest, I'm still trying to process everything. My parents, Mary and David, were the most wonderful people imaginable, and they told me from a young age that my birth mother had loved me very much, but wasn't able to keep me. Your letter confirmed that. It means more to me than you can know. I'm not angry. I'm a lot of things. Shocked, curious, a little overwhelmed, but not angry. I have a good life. I'm married to a wonderful woman named Sarah, and we have 2 children, Lily, who is 10, and Ben, who is 7. I own my own carpentry business. My parents would have wanted me to reply to you. I would like that too. Maybe we could continue to email for a bit, if that's okay with you. Yours, Samuel. I read the email 10 times, 20 times, the tears blurring the words until they were just a shimmering haze of hope. He had a family. He was a carpenter. He wasn't angry. He wanted to talk to me. I immediately wrote back, my fingers flying across the screen, telling him how much his words meant to me, how happy I was to hear about his life, his wife, his children, my grandchildren. The word itself was a miracle. Over the next few weeks, a new world opened up to me through our emails. We exchanged life stories in careful, respectful installments. I sent him a few photos, one of me and Robert on our wedding day, one of a young Walter. He sent me photos in return. The first time I saw his face, I gasped. He had my dark hair, but he had a kind, open smile that was all his own. He was handsome. He looked happy. I saw pictures of his wife, Sarah, a woman with warm, intelligent eyes, and his children, Lily, with her bright, gap-toothed grin, and Ben, a serious-looking little boy with a shock of blonde hair. My family. The emails soon gave way to text messages, and then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, he called. I saw his name on my phone and my heart did a nervous flutter kick. "Hello," I answered, my voice barely a whisper. "Jane, it's Samuel." Hearing his voice for the first time was like hearing a song. I didn't know. I knew the words too. It was deeper than I imagined, with a gentle, steady cadence. We talked for over an hour. It was awkward at first, full of fits and starts, but soon the conversation began to flow. He told me about his adoptive parents, how they had always spoken of his birth mother with respect and compassion. He asked about Robert. I found myself telling him about Robert's love for woodworking, how he had a workshop in the garage. "No kidding," Samuel said, his voice full of surprise. "My dad, my adoptive dad, he was an accountant. I think my love for carpentry must have come from your side of the family." That small connection, that shared thread of genetics felt monumental. As our conversation wound down, a comfortable quiet settled between us. It was so different from the strained silences that punctuated every conversation with Walter. Speaking of Walter, my newfound secret joy was unfolding against a backdrop of his escalating low-grade panic. Having received no response to his voicemail about the boat, he had started calling more frequently. I had begun screening his calls, letting them go to voicemail not out of spite, but because his frantic, demanding energy felt like a violation of the fragile, beautiful new space I was inhabiting. His messages grew more and more agitated. "Mom, are you getting my calls? Did you send the papers? I need to finalize the sale. Call me back. Mom, seriously, what is going on? Did you change your number? This isn't funny." Then came the call that was so perfectly, quintessentially Walter that I almost had to laugh. "Mom," his voicemail began, his voice tight with irritation. "Meredith is in a total tailspin. Her mother is trying to make your pecan pie for the Heart's big Christmas party, and she can't get it right. She says it's not the same. Meredith needs the recipe. The exact recipe, with all your little notes on it. Text it to me. Immediately." The irony was so thick I could have sliced it with a knife. He had unceremoniously kicked me out of his Christmas, yet he still felt entitled to my contributions. He didn't want my presents, but he demanded my pie recipe, my labor, my knowledge, my years of accumulated skill. Those were still his for the taking. He wanted the fruits of a family-oriented mother, without the bother of having the actual mother around. I didn't text him the recipe. I was too busy. I was on the phone with my son, my other son, the one who asked me what my favorite color was, what books I liked to read, what it was like growing up in our small town, the one who listened. As November slid into December, the holiday season began to cast its glow. One evening, Samuel called. "So Sarah and I have been talking," he said, a note of hesitation in his voice. "This is probably way too fast, and please feel free to say no. But what are you doing for Christmas?" My heart stuttered. "Well, nothing really. I was just planning on a quiet day at home." "Right," he said. "Well, we usually have a quiet day too, and we were thinking we live about a 3-hour drive from you. What would you think about us coming to you for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day? Sarah and the kids are so excited about the idea of meeting you, but no pressure. It's a lot, I know." A lot? It was everything. It was a lifeboat in the middle of a vast, lonely ocean. It was the sound of laughter filling the silence. It was a choice. My Christmas was no longer a default setting of solitude decided by Walter's whims. I had an invitation. I had a family that wanted me. "Samuel," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I would love that. I would love nothing more." The power had shifted. It had shifted so completely that Walter wouldn't even know what had hit him. He had cast me out into the cold, but I was about to be welcomed into a warmth I hadn't known was possible. My acceptance of Samuel's offer changed everything. The entire atmosphere of my house, of my life, seemed to shift. The gray, muted tones of impending loneliness were replaced by a vibrant, humming anticipation. I went into a flurry of activity. I pulled out the boxes of Christmas decorations from the attic, not with a sense of weary obligation, but with genuine excitement. I pictured Lily's and Ben's faces when they saw the tree. I bought new flannel sheets for the guest room and a small basket of toys and coloring books for the children. My home, which Walter and Meredith had dismissed as the setting for a sad, solitary holiday, was being transformed into a haven of welcome. The exodus was complete. I had emotionally seceded from Walter's cold little kingdom and was founding a new country of my own. A few days before Christmas, the inevitable call came. It was Walter, and this time he sounded not just irritated, but genuinely panicked. I decided to answer. "Mom, finally," he burst out without so much as a hello. "There's a problem, a big one." I waited, listening to the frantic edge in his voice. "My cousin Susan, you know how she talks. She was having lunch with Meredith's mother yesterday, and Susan mentioned how you always host Christmas, how you make the whole house smell like a gingerbread factory. And now Beth, Meredith's mother, feels incredibly awkward. She thinks we strong-armed you into staying home alone. She's worried it makes them look bad, like they're stealing their son-in-law from his poor widowed mother." I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. It was, as always, all about appearances, not my feelings, but how my absence reflected on them. "What am I supposed to tell them, Mom?" he demanded. "Meredith is furious with me. She said I handled this all wrong. She says we look like terrible people." "You are terrible people," I thought. But I said, "I don't know what to tell you, Walter. You're the one who made the arrangements." He let out an exasperated sigh, the sound of a man accustomed to having his problems solved by others. He switched tactics, his tone shifting from panicked anger to a wheedling, manipulative plea. It was a voice I knew well, the one he used when he wanted something he knew he didn't deserve. Look, Mom. Okay, I get it. Maybe I was a little clumsy in how I explained things. But can't you just help me out here? Just come for an hour. Come for dessert. Put on a nice sweater. Show your face. Be charming to the hearts for a little while. It would mean a lot to me. It would smooth everything over. There it was, the summons. Not an apology, not an invitation born of love or regret. A command performance. I was to appear as a prop in his life, to play the part of the happy, contented mother for an audience of his important business contacts, and then quietly disappear again once my role was complete. A year ago, a month ago even, I might have said yes. I might have swallowed my pride and my pain, all for the sake of keeping the peace, of maintaining the flimsy illusion of our family. But I was a different woman now. I was a woman with plans. A profound sense of calm settled over me. I was no longer a supplicant begging for scraps of affection from his table. I was the host of my own feast. "I'm sorry, Walter," I said, my voice even and clear, "but I can't. I already have plans for Christmas." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could practically hear the gears in his brain grinding to a halt. It was a concept he simply could not compute. Plans. He finally sputtered, his voice a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "What plans? Who would you have plans with? You don't have any other family." The cruelty of that last sentence, meant to be a statement of fact, a final reminder of my lonely station in the world, no longer had any power over me. It was a lie, and I held the beautiful secret truth of it in my heart. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't reveal my secret. I simply held my ground. "I have plans, Walter," I repeated softly. "They are important to me. I hope you and Meredith have a lovely time at the Hearts. I have to go now. Goodbye." And before he could recover, before he could launch into another round of questions or demands, I pressed the end call button. I had hung up on my son. For the first time in my life, I had prioritized my own happiness over his demands. The house was quiet, but it was a powerful, anticipatory quiet. The takeover was silent, but it was complete. He had no idea what was coming, but I did. Laughter was coming. Joy was coming. Family was coming. Christmas Eve arrived on a flurry of snowflakes, dusting the world in a pristine coat of white. I stood at my front window, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs, watching the street, and then I saw it. A dark blue minivan turning the corner, slowing as it approached my house. This was it. After 40 years, my son was coming home. The van pulled into the driveway, the doors opened, and out he stepped. Samuel. He was taller than I'd imagined from the photos, with broad shoulders under a thick winter coat. He looked around at the house, my house, with an expression of wonder. Then a woman got out of the passenger side, Sarah, her smile as warm as it had looked in the pictures. And then the back doors slid open, and two small figures bundled in snowsuits tumbled out, their excited shrieks cutting through the quiet winter air. Lily and Ben, my grandchildren. I opened the front door just as they reached the porch steps. For a moment we all just stood there. Samuel's eyes met mine, and in them I saw 1,000 questions and a deep, soul-shaking kindness. He had my eyes. I'd known it from the photos, but seeing them in person, looking back at me with so much emotion, it was overwhelming. "Jane," he said, his voice soft. "Samuel," I breathed, and then he was closing the distance between us, wrapping his arms around me in a hug that was both tentative and powerful. I buried my face in his shoulder, a sob catching in my throat. It felt like the closing of a circle, the healing of a wound I had carried for my entire adult life. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of beautiful, ordinary chaos. The silence of my home was shattered by the sound of children's laughter. Ben, my serious little grandson, was fascinated by Robert's old model train set, which I'd set up in the living room. He sat for hours, his small brow furrowed in concentration, as Samuel, a carpenter with a craftsman's gentle hands, showed him how to work the controls. Lily, my granddaughter, appointed herself my official assistant. We baked sugar cookies in the kitchen, her small hands diligently pressing festive shapes into the dough, getting more flour on herself than on the baking sheet. She had a bright, inquisitive mind and a laugh that sounded like tiny bells. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was a gift. She moved through my home with an easy grace, treating me not like a fragile old woman or a stranger to be handled with caution, but like family. We talked for hours, sitting by the fire, mugs of hot chocolate in our hands, sharing stories and finding the easy comfort of women who understand one another. On Christmas morning, we opened presents around the tree. I had bought small, simple gifts for them all, but the real gift was their presence. It was watching Ben's eyes go wide when he opened a new locomotive for the train set. It was the delicate silver locket I gave to Lily, which she immediately put on. It was the beautiful hand-carved birdhouse Samuel had made for me in his workshop, a testament to the talent he had inherited from a grandfather he'd never met. In the middle of the afternoon, as the turkey roasted in the oven and the house filled with the warm, savory scent of a real family Christmas, my phone buzzed on the end table. I glanced at it. It was a text from Walter. It was a picture of him, Meredith, and her parents, all standing in a stark white living room. They were holding champagne flutes, their smiles looking brittle and forced. The text underneath read, "Having a great time. Hope you're not too lonely." It was such a petty, spiteful little dart, designed to remind me of what I was missing, to make me feel small and alone. A month ago it would have shattered me, but now I looked at the picture on my phone, at the four stiff figures in their sterile environment. Then I looked up. Across the room, Samuel was down on the floor with Ben, their heads bent together over the train tracks. Sarah and Lily were curled up on the sofa, reading a story, Lily's head resting on her mother's shoulder. The room was a mess of wrapping paper, new toys and pine needles. The air was filled with the low murmur of happy conversation and the distant whistle of a model train. It was life. It was warmth. It was real. My revenge was not in anger. It was in joy. My vindication was not in telling Walter off. It was in the simple, profound truth of this moment. I picked up my phone, but not to reply to him. I opened the camera and took a picture of my living room, a candid, unposed shot of my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, a picture of my family, their faces alight with genuine happiness. I looked at Walter's text, then at the photo I had just taken. I didn't send it to him. I didn't need to. His world was one of performance and appearances. Mine was now one of quiet, solid reality. I just smiled, a real deep from the heart smile, and put the phone away. Later that night, after a wonderful dinner, after the children were tucked into bed in the guest room, the phone rang again. It was Walter. I could tell from the late hour and the caller ID that this would not be a pleasant call. I let Samuel and Sarah know I needed to take it and stepped into the quiet of the kitchen. "What?" I answered, my voice neutral. "I want to know what plans were so important that you couldn't spare 1 hour for your only son." He slurred slightly. He was drunk and angry. I looked through the doorway into the living room, where the lights of the Christmas tree cast a warm glow. Samuel was sitting in Robert's armchair, reading a book, the picture of peaceful contentment. My vindication didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be true. I'm with family, Walter, I said softly. What the hell is that supposed to mean? He demanded. Who are you with? I'm with my son, I said, and before he could process the word, before he could ask another question, I hung up. I had told him the absolute truth, and the truth itself was the perfect revenge. He had built a wall between us, and I had simply walked away and found a door into a better room. The day after Christmas, Samuel and his family packed up their minivan. The goodbyes were not sad, but full of promise. There were tight hugs and promises to visit again in the spring, to call every week. As I watched them drive away, my house fell silent once more, but it was a different silence now. It wasn't the hollow ache of loneliness. It was the peaceful echo of joy. The ghosts of what if had been replaced by the warm living memories of what was, and the happy anticipation of what will be. I've had some time to reflect since then, to process this incredible turn of events. I've thought a lot about that phrase Walter used to throw at me, family-oriented. He used it like a weapon, a standard I could never meet, a way to frame his demands as my obligation. To him, being family-oriented meant I should be perpetually available, a service provider for his life, ready to supply pies, signatures, and emotional support on his terms, expecting nothing in return. He saw family as a hierarchy with him at the top, but Samuel showed me what being family-oriented really means. It's not a duty. It's a connection. It's mutual curiosity, shared laughter, and showing up for each other with open hearts. It's a carpenter's son taking the time to show his little boy how his grandfather's old train works. It's a daughter-in-law who sits and talks with you for hours because she genuinely wants to know you. It's grandchildren whose bright, shining faces light up your home. It's a family you choose to build, not one you are forced to serve. I suppose there's a part of me that wonders if my actions were a form of revenge, and if I'm being honest with myself, maybe they were. It wasn't about revenge until it was. But the revenge I found wasn't the kind Walter, with his focus on status and winning, would ever understand. My victory wasn't in taking something away from him, his inheritance, his comfortable reality. My victory was in giving something to myself, a second chance, a chance to finally be the mother to the son I had lost, and the incredible unexpected gift of being a grandmother. I haven't heard from Walter since that Christmas night phone call. I imagine he is confused and angry, stewing in his own bitter juices, trying to solve the puzzle of my sudden inexplicable happiness. One day, I will tell him about Samuel, but not yet. For now, this new family is mine to cherish, a fragile, beautiful thing that I need to protect from the sterile cold of his world. I find I don't think about him much. I pity him, in a distant sort of way. He's trapped in a life of his own making, chasing a hollow version of success that will never bring him the kind of simple, profound joy that filled my house this Christmas. He let go of my hand long ago, and I have finally blessedly let go of his. My story, the part about a long-lost son, might be unique, but I know that the feeling of being taken for granted, of being overlooked by the very people who are supposed to love you most, is not. So many of us play roles we were assigned, quietly enduring the casual cruelty of being undervalued. If you've ever felt that way, if you've ever had your love treated like an obligation, I hope you'll share your own story in the comments below. There is a quiet strength in knowing you are not alone in your experience. And if hearing stories of quiet strength and new beginnings brings you a little bit of peace, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories to be told.